feels so right to see you lying.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched and liked last week's episode of the show. I would say thank you for everybody that commented on last week's episode of the show, but there wasn't any comments, which was unusual. But nevertheless, I mean, as long as you guys enjoyed the show, commenting is not obligatory, it has to be said. Although I do like to read your comments, even if they're a bit sort of off the wall, should we say? But anyway, yes. So one thing I would like you to do, guys, if you haven't as yet subscribed to the channel, I would really appreciate it if you did that. I think we're about sort of 1,800 and something odd subscribers at the moment, so it would be lovely to get to 2,000 by the end of the year. Certainly that's something I would it would be really nice if we could get there, and so obviously I need your help in doing that. So yep, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Right, as per usual, any comments I make are my own comments and bear no relevance or any direct link to the company I work for. Now, talking of that, now there were a few comments a while back when I obviously explained the reasoning for why I can't talk about the company that I work for, saying, well, you know, we want to know what you're stocking, you know, this is why we watch your show. And the honest answer to that is, well, read between the lines. You know, obviously I can't say for definite which of these or if any of these particular or the whiskies that I review on a regular basis will be in stock in said emporium, but you just have to kind of read between the lines. You know, it's as simple as that. And of course, obviously, you're more than welcome to contact me, either sort of leave a comment, direct message me, that kind of stuff, you know. But you know, as I said, you know, I'm no longer allowed to mention if I mean, I could talk about it in a hypothetical way and say, well, if I was a retailer, I would, but obviously I can't say for definite what the company I work for will be stocking. So, like I said, just please read between the lines. So, today's episode of the show, carrying on the theme of the last few weeks, looking at some really new brands, new stuff. I mean, this stuff is so brand new, it's not even available in anywhere as yet. I mean, I don't know whether there's been some, well, I know there's been some issues getting the orders out. Shouldn't say that. And so basically all the pictures for the title page I've had to kind of like manipulate in Photoshop. They're not the actual bottles, but they'll obviously look something very, very similar. As you well know, Hunter Laing have you know, haven't changed the labels as yet. I mean, they've been that way for quite a while yet. So, but they kind of do the job, as they say. So yes, we're looking at half a dozen new releases in the Old Malt Cask range. I thought it's been a while since I've done an up-to-date, brand spanking new episode of the show with brand spanking new independent releases, and as you well know, I'm a huge fan of the independent sector, and you may well have noticed a lack of thing behind me, and the glasses are turned the other way because they obviously, the brands are, should we say, the competition, and although I can't cover them up completely, maybe I should have put some sticky tape on them, I suppose, but anyway, I've turned them around, so hopefully I don't offend anyone at Hunter Laing for the use of the glasses, and you know, anyway, it's all about it's all about the juice in the bottle, as they say, and so I'm not going to waffle on any longer. There's not really a great deal to say. I've done a number of episodes of the show on Hunter Laing in the past, so let's just take a look at today's lineup, shall we?
Days are gone for good, but you're still with me now.
So, like I said, I mean, I think there was probably about a dozen bottlings this or last month. These were the new releases for June, and I've selected 6, which I think are kind of interesting. So the first bottling we'll be looking at is a 13-year-old Mortlach. This was distilled in June of 2007 and bottled, I believe, of this year. It has been finished in a wine cask of some form or description. Hopefully we'll kind of figure that out when we taste it. Bottled at 50%. Bottling number 2 we're going to be looking at is a 16-year-old Glen Moray. This was distilled in May of 2005, again bottled I believe sometime this year. I mean, I'm assuming they were bottled at sometime this year. They could have been bottled tail end of last year. I don't honestly know is the honest answer. This is so bottled again at 50%, as they all are. Bottling number 3, interesting, a Pulteney. An 18-year-old Pulteney distilled in September of 2002. Don't really see a great deal of Pulteney in the independents, so nice to see a bottling. Hopefully it will be good, but obviously we'll let you know when we get there. Number 4, one of my favourite distilleries. Yeah, this is a Dingston. Now this is a 25-year-old Deanston, distilled in January of 1996, so yeah, okay, that's going to be intriguing. The penultimate bottling is another 25-year-old. This is from the Speyside distillery. Again, bottled 50%, distilled September 1995. As you can see, all of these are American oak, obviously, apart from the Mortlach, I'm guessing, was originally an American oak before being finished in wine. So happy bunny, as they say. And the final bottling we'll be looking at is a Talisker, a 12-year-old Talisker distilled in 2010, weirdly labelled as bourbon finished. Now, a bit kind of confused about, well, concerned to be honest with you. Why would you age something in an ex-bourbon cask and then finish it in bourbon? Obviously the most obvious reason behind it is because, well, it had no oak character to start off with. And it is a Talisker, and it is not cheap. It hits the shelves at around about 115, 118 pounds. And I believe, certainly when I was looking back through my previous tasting notes in Hunter Laing bottlings of Pulteney, I think this is probably the oldest one they've released for quite some considerable time. It seems to me that both Hunter Laing and the other Laing company have a bit of a sort of a fetish for bottling Talisker around about 8 or 9 years of age, and sometimes it just doesn't have enough depth of character at that kind of age. So I'm really looking forward to finishing off the tasting with that. But obviously before we do, we've got Mortlach. Okay, so kicking off with the wine finished Mortlach. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that is a gorgeous nose. Really summery, aromatic, juicy, barley, apple, pear, little bit of oiliness. Obviously Mortlach has a nice weight to its spirit. Buckets of honey, I mean really loads and loads of honey, and it's got a almost Alsatian wine cask kind of finish. Now it'd be weird, you know, if this had been finished in ex-Pinot Gris casks, for example. That would have been really unusual, and it would have been lovely if they'd have said, but they don't tend to do that. They just tend to sort of wine cask finish, and then you kind of have to figure it out yourself. I mean, it's got a lovely sweetness, a lovely richness. There's a balancing citric note that kind of scythes its way through, but that's gorgeous. That is wonderfully balanced, beautifully aromatic, hitting the shelves, I believe, I'm trying to remember now, somewhere in the 80s, 88, something like that, possibly. Yes, you can argue it's expensive for a 13-year-old, but it's a single cask bottling, so bear in mind the premium you pay for those. And on the nose, that is stunningly good. Let's see what the palate's like. Damn, that's juicy. Juicy, rich, slightly oily, barley, again, wonderful fruit, apple, apricot, touch of pineapple. The tannins are a little bit grippy, but they're not bitter. They do grip on the mid palate, but in comes a touch of vanilla on the aftertaste, and that fruit just lingers. And there's a lovely citric thread that kind of runs through it and kind of picks up the pace right towards the end. So you're getting a little bit of vanilla, you're getting the palate cleansing citrus. Obviously it's aided by the slightly higher ABV as well. And that's stunningly good. I mean, I love that. I mean, that just really ticks all my boxes. Beautifully fruity, beautifully balanced, bit of citrus. I mean, you know, really summery. What more could you ask for? Right, okay, so let's move on to the 16-year-old Glen Moray. Now, I'm a big fan of Glen Moray. I think it's a wonderful Speyside whisky. Independent bottlings have had a tendency to be a bit hit and miss over the years. So let's see what this one does then. That's lovely, lovely weight to it. Orange blossom, honey. Again, lovely balancing citric note, lime. I mean, it's got that lovely kind of liminess which just cuts through that sort of honeyed sweetness. There's a little bit of heather, touch of dusty barley, a little bit of dusty oak. The oak is starting to show some maturity, not too mature, but again got that lovely kind of balance between fruit and oak. I mean, it's not quite, I would say, as complex as the Mortlach, but it certainly delivers a lot of character. At the end of the day, that's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. And yeah, let's see what the palt's on. A little lighter on the palate, touch more white fruit, a little bit of granulated sugar. Again, got that lime note really coming through on the finish. A little bit more vanilla, a little bit more creaminess, less dusty. Again, some lovely barley, good weight. Like I say, a little bit lighter, possibly a little bit, you could argue a little bit more elegant than, say, the Mortlach, but still loads and loads of character, loads of fruit. Lovely, lovely Glen Moray.
Embrace the best of me. It's so pure and so divine.
Right, okay, let's move on to the 18-year-old Pulteney. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Now that's showing more maturity than I would expect at 18. It's got that, again, lovely dusty, sawdusty American oak character. Salt, lemon, white fruit. A little bit of a waxiness there in the background. Touch of pepper, some vanilla, a little bit of almost melon. Touch, just a smidge of smoke there in the background. The oak is starting to develop, it's starting to become a little bit more creamier, it's starting to become a little bit more forward, but I still think the balance is pretty good. That's a lovely nose, that's a lovely Pulteney. Not quite as salty or windswept as the distillery bottling, so I'm guessing the cask has probably been matured on the mainland for a few years, possibly even the entirety of its life, but even if that's the case, it still retains that little bit of coastal character, a little bit of salt. I mean, you know, you don't want a sort of a Pulteney that's completely devoid of any maritime character, do you, at the end of the day? But that's got some lovely weight to it. That's a great nose. Let's see what it passes on. That's a lovely, limey, citric, vibrant finish. Kind of kicks off again with the sort of the lime, touch of barley, salt, white fruit. Really builds up quite nicely. The weight develops on the mid palate. A little bit of honey, apricot, a little bit of oak. Maybe not quite so much oak as the nose was displaying, which is good. So the finish, like I said, the salt, the lime, the alcohol really balances, and it finishes with a little fade of pepper, a little bit of ginger as well. I mean, that is a gorgeous whiskey. The thing is that's going to hit the shelves at, what was it, about 145. I mean, it's expensive, you know, and you know, looking at the sort of the prices, I mean, yes, it's a gorgeous whiskey, but I will say that the Speyside, for argument's sake, the 25-year-old, is only £5 more. And you know, you sort of like look at it on paper, you think, well, yeah, okay, it's a bloody good bottling, but for £5 more, I can have a 25-year-old, you know, which is a little bit of a shame, I guess, but you know, that's the price of whiskey these days. You know, you from a sort of a well-known distillery and a well-loved distillery, of course, you know, that's the price you have to pay these days, I'm afraid.
When we walking on the island far away.
Right, time for a bit of Deanston then, you know. Anyway, not prejudging this whatsoever, let's just see what the nose gives us. Quite crisp, quite citric, a little bit of mature oak, honey, cognac-y dried fruits. It's a slight astringency, a herbal astringency in the background, some white licorice, a little bit of an industrial note, a little bit of hardness. But you know what? Actually, that's not a bad nose for a Deanston, it has to be said. Yes, you're never going to escape the distillery character. It's the same with all of these distilleries that have this kind of industrial character. You're never going to get away from it. And as I always say, it needs some kind of counterbalance, something to offset that hardness. And this has it in spades. I mean, so this is the best thing to do with Dingston. Stick it in a cask for 2 decades and just sort of kind of leave it. You know, don't bottle it. You know, do not bottle this at anything less than 25 years of age. You know. So for Deanston, well, anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Again, citric, limey, lemony. Again, cognac-y, dried fruit, bit more oak, bit more vanilla'd oak, but again showing a really nice maturity. It does fade relatively quickly, although I would say the length overall is quite long. It does kind of come back with some classic gooseberry, lime, a little bit of chocolatey spice as well. Overall, lovely maturity. Yes, there's again, like I said, there's that touch of industrial distillery character, but because there's so many secondary and tertiary flavours and characteristics happening, it's pretty much well contained, and it's sort of like, you know, all right, yep, getting a hint of the distillery, but you know, I'm getting so much more, and like I said, for a Deanston, I have to say I'm pretty impressed. Okay, so let's move on to the Speyside. So as you very well know, you know, the Speyside distillery is synonymous with the use of sherry casks, although, as you well know, over the years they have attempted to kind of move away from that preconception. Certainly you have the Trutina and the Moray, for example, that are both wholly aged in American oak and bloody good. So, you know, Speyside, in my personal opinion, does not need sherry, and I'm hoping this will say the same. So, that reeks of maturity. Lovely sawdusty American oak, dusty dried fruit, sugar-coated lime, manuka honey, mandarin, a little bit of oxidised fruit, a little bit of toffee, some berries, some straw, a little bit of nettles as well. I mean, that is just such a gorgeous nose, and like I said, you know, only about a fiver or so more than the Pulteney. And I mean, I'm not saying that this is, you know, it's all about sort of preconception to a certain extent. You see something as 18-year-old and you see a 25-year-old and you think, well, £5 more, but you know, and it's, but you know, and you can't really compare the two. They are very different animals, but by God, this is gorgeous. I mean, it just does everything you want, you know. It's got that lovely maturity, it's elegant, it's delicate, and it's not sherry to hell, you know. It's like, oh, this is good. So that's right. That's stunning, absolutely stunning. I mean, kicks off with a little bit of citrus, lime, lemon, barley, wonderfully fresh, oxidised fruit, dusty American oak, slightly grippy on the mid palate, but I'm getting an almost sort of, maybe a bit of pear drops possibly, certainly some dried fruit, a little bit of wood spice, a little bit of tannin, dries a little bit on the finish, but again, plenty of honey there to kind of offset that drying sort of tannin note, brings in the spices as well. A little bit of nettles on the aftertaste. I mean, that is stunningly good, and this is the point, you know, it's kind of Speyside distillery, doesn't have the cachet of certain other well-known distilleries, and so the price of the 25-year-old, in my personal opinion, is actually pretty damn good. You know, 150 something odd a bottle, you know, I mean, not a problem with that whatsoever. I mean, that is just a stunningly good whiskey. It's delicate, it's elegant, but by God, does that have some depth. I mean, that's good.
We vanish into the dark.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the Talisker. So 12 years old. Let's see what nose gives on this end, shall we? Ooh, that's not bad. He says that's not bad. It's actually bloody good. Fresh, citric, barley, quite a bit of peach smoke, apple, almost estery. I mean, what, estery fruit, Talisker? More, really? You know, I mean, as you know, Talisker, a bit hit and miss, stupidly expensive at the top end, arguably a little bit too much sherry at times as well, but here you have the distillery character absolutely on show. It's gorgeous. It really reminds me of not quite so intensely coastal as maybe Talisker of maybe a decade or so back, but certainly we're in throwback kind of mode here. Grapefruit, lemon, bit of almost kind of coastal bonfires. That is stunning. I mean, yeah, all right. So for a 12-year-old whiskey, we're in about 115, 118 pound a bottle, but yeah, love this. Sort of pass one. That really tastes older than 12 years old. That oak is showing some lovely maturity. Again, juicy, fruity, estery. I mean, estery? I mean, that's certainly not a characteristic I would attach to Talisker. Earth, honey, subtler peach smoke, a little bit of mentholated, slightly astringent herbs, touch of vanilla, lovely salty finish. I mean, really salty. I mean, if this spent 12 years on the mainland, I'm where did that salt come from? I mean, that just goes to show that the salt or the spirit has kind of held on to that saltiness, and it's like, well, you're not going to let that go. In fact, there's an inordinate amount of salt. I mean, you know, maybe I mean, I don't know what the sort of cask buying at Hunter Lang is like. I mean, certainly the company's been in existence for an inordinate length of time, and certainly has built up stocks, and I guess they have the ability to purchase fresh fillings and all that kind of stuff, but maybe every now and again they do have the option to, you know, the ability, I should say, to buy slightly more mature casks. I don't know, but loads and loads of salt, loads and loads of character. I would almost go as far as saying that this is possibly the best independently bottled Talisker that I have tasted, certainly at least in the last 10 years. I really don't ever remember getting this enthusiastic and this worked up over a Talisker. You know, more often than not, like I said, they often have a little bit of a tendency to be overpriced and underwhelming, but this, it's pricey, but it is certainly not underwhelming whatsoever. That is bloody good.
And we walking on the island far away.
Right, okay, so let's start today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Hunter Lang for the samples for today's episode of the show. It certainly seems now that we're a couple of months down the line from the easing of the lockdown restrictions, and things are slowly getting back to normal within the whisky industry. Obviously, the samples are starting to sort of flow, and you know, it's really good. It's really nice to sort of feel like we're coming back to sort of somewhere approaching normality. I mean, obviously we're not completely there yet, and hopefully next month we will take another, or later this month I think we'll take another step towards that. I think it's probably not likely to be until sort of maybe closer to the end of the year that we're really in a. I wouldn't like to hedge my bets, but anyway, shall we say, things are moving, which is really quite nice, and samples are appearing and new stuff is arriving, and it's good. It's really cool. So today's episode, the Mortlach, I mean, absolutely gorgeous. Mortlach, you know, I love Mortlach and American oak. It has that weightiness. The wine finish was just beautifully balanced. Like I said, very, very much in a sort of an Alsatian kind of style. So it'd be really intriguing to know what that was, you know, the cask that was finished in. Glen Moray, again, a lovely bottling. Yeah, just sort of, you know, showing Glen Moray maybe a slightly more weightier character than you would normally expect, but, you know, still a very, very good bottling. The Pulteney, again, a lovely bottling, a tad maybe too expensive, I guess, for my personal taste, but, you know, if you're quite happy to spend, you know, 100 and something odd, 50 odd or whatever it was for an 18-year-old Pulteney, then, and if it's available in your locale, then certainly I would not dissuade you from purchasing it. Bloody good. The Deanston, well, as they say, every dog has its day, and this goes to show that the best thing to do with Dingston is to stick it in a cask and leave it. Get some other characteristic to balance up the distillery character, and suddenly you have a lovely whiskey. I mean, you know, how many times have you ever heard me describe Deanston as lovely? I mean, you know, it doesn't happen. You know, I'm expecting a lightning bolt at this moment in time, shall we say. The Speyside, I mean, brilliant value for money. I mean, yes, all right, again, we're talking 150 odd pound a bottle, which is not cheap by anybody's standards, but you get so much bang for your buck there, you know, and this just goes to show that sort of, you know, you look outside of the sort of like the big names, and you can find some really good value for money. And finally, the Talisker. Like I said, yes, again, we are quite expensive for a 12-year-old, but that, like I said, is arguably the best independently bottled Talisker I've had in donkey's years. I mean, I mean, estuary fruit Talisker. I mean, oh my God, they broke the mould when they distilled that one, or put that one into cask, I can say. And it just goes to show that you know, that the quality of the spirit that is distilled at Talisker is really, really impressive. But so often it just disappoints. But that bottling, nope, that didn't disappoint whatsoever. Anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Like I said, if you want to know what bottlings may well be appearing on the shelf at the company I work for, read between the lines. Anyway, until next week, good dramming and good afternoon.